While Franklin was at sea, crossing from England to his home in Philadelphia, American and British soldiers fired the first shots of the Revolution at Lexington and Concord. In the following weeks, a stalemate ensued as a de facto colonial army encircled the British, who occupied the Boston Peninsula and its harbor. In late May of 1775, less than 2 months after the fight on Concord Bridge, reinforcements arrived from Britain, including General William Howe, who had fought beside the Americans in the French and Indian War. Pompous yet competent General Henry Clinton, also a veteran of the French and Indian War. And General Johnny Burgoyne, gambler, dramatist, and bon vivant. All three would play important roles in the coming years of war.
Some of the soldiers thought that one big battle would settle it all. It would enable the Americans to win such a resounding victory that the British maybe would say, oh, we can't possibly defeat these people, they're just too tough, and we'll sue for peace.
A leading advocate of a military rather than diplomatic solution was Connecticut's Israel Putnam, a scarred old Indian fighter, another veteran of the French and Indian War.
He was a tremendously pugnacious soldier and a very professional soldier, very good soldier. He was the Patton of his day, the ideal combat guy. He had decided that the perfect thing to do to trigger this one big battle was to build a fort on this Charlestown Peninsula that stuck out on one side of Boston with some water in between it. And a fort there with some cannon in it could shell every British ship on the harbor.
On the night of June 16, 1775, the Americans began to fortify Breed's Hill on the Charlestown Peninsula, lower but closer to the water than nearby Bunker Hill. In the morning, the Redcoats were amazed to see an earthworks fort threatening their ships. The British generals ordered 2/3 of their troops in Boston into flatboats and transported them to the Charlestown Peninsula. As the rebels watched and waited atop Breed's Hill, a ball from a British cannon decapitated a young colonist. Some threw down their arms and fled, but nearly 1,200 remained.
There is where Putnam got off his great line, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," which was very good advice for people firing an American musket, because it couldn't hit anything unless you could see the whites of the guy's eyes.
An additional fact may also have prompted Putnam's command. Powder was extremely short. Most of the rebels had reached Breed's Hill with less than 13 rounds each.
Our troops advanced with great confidence, expecting an easy victory. As we approached, an incessant stream of fire poured from the rebel lines. It seemed a continued sheet of fire for near 30 minutes. Most of our grenadiers and light infantry, the moment of presenting themselves, lost 3/4, and many 9/10 of their men. Some had only 8 and 9 men a company left. Some only 3, 4, and 5. British officer at Breed's Hill.
The British were turned back, but they regrouped and marched again on Breed's Hill.
The main thing any soldier would see in a Revolutionary War battle is smoke. Because once all these muskets and artillery started shooting, the battlefield was covered with a thick white smoke. It wouldn't be the typical romantic 18th century painting where everybody's standing heroic in isolated groups fighting other little isolated groups. The uniforms were designed with a stock around the neck to keep the soldier's head up and make it hard to look left and right. They didn't want the soldier to think about what was going on. It was just better if he was an automaton that followed orders.
The British retreated a second time from Breed's Hill, but late in the day, General Howe ordered a third assault.
The whole American supply system was so primitive that it collapsed, and the Americans ran out of powder. And the British bulldogs that they were regrouped and came on for a third try after being beaten back twice, and the Americans with no powder just had to take to their heels.
The British won control of Breeds Hill, Bunker Hill, and the entire Charlestown Peninsula, but at a tremendous physical and psychological cost. Nearly half of their 2,200-man landing force had been killed or wounded.
The Battle of Bunker Hill was a terrible eye-opener for the British generals. If you went on fighting battles like that with the small force of British troops in America and the very limited reinforcements that the British were capable of raising and sending in, you'd soon destroy your army.
I freely confess to you, when I look to the consequences of it, in the loss of so many brave officers, I do it with horror. The success is too dearly bought. General William Howe.
Putnam and his comrades were wrong about one big battle ending the fighting. After the bloodshed on Breeds Hill, both sides now came to the conclusion that a full-scale war was inevitable.
Even as the first chapter of the Revolution closed at the Battle of Bunker Hill, a self-declared Continental Congress was laying plans for the Revolution's next phase, here in the Assembly Room of Independence Hall, at that time Pennsylvania State House. That meeting would identify the man who became the embodiment of the Revolution, George Washington.